Schönen guten Abend noch einmal. Also herzlich willkommen. Ich möchte Sie bzw. euch herzlich willkommen heißen zu dieser besonderen Veranstaltung. Wir haben einen besonderen Gast heute Abend, der bereits auch von der Kollegin Jelena Parina eingeführt wird. Deshalb halte ich es ziemlich kurz, ich fasse mich kurz. Aber einen besonderen Gast, seit 2016 Bardd Genedlaethol Cymru, also so der nationaler Dichter von Wales, eine große Ehre, und wir sind auch wirklich sehr verehrt, dass Sie bzw. du hier heute Abend auch für uns deine Arbeit, dein Werk präsentieren wirst. Also ich wollte nur noch mal sagen, Croeso yn fawr I Marburg, mein vriend in die Diolch yn fawr.
Oh. Ifor war sehr bescheiden in unserer Korrespondenz und meinte, dass er nur ein bisschen Schuldeutsch hat, was eigentlich sich heute während unseres Seminar mit den Studierenden als sehr viel Deutsch erwiesen hatte. Aber ich habe meine Rede, kurze, keine Angst, auf Englisch verfasst, damit es verstanden wird, und so werde ich es dann halten. Anut Kvechion, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, dear friends, it is a great honor for me to welcome today in the heart of Marburg our distinguished guest, the National Poet of Wales, Ifor ap Glyn. We are deeply grateful that he can share his poetry with us today at the Marburger Haus der Romantik and with the extended circle of listeners, thanks to the recording. The Marburg House of Romanticism is dedicated to a Freundekreis, a circle of friends who were active here in the first years of the 19th century. Among them, Bettina and Clemens Brentano, Friedrich Karl von Savigny, and Brüder Grimm, Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm. And it is astonishing how much the world we live today has been influenced by Romanticism. It has molded our understanding of the national, being also a highly international movement, one of the topics of research of Professor Alderic Blom. Interest in Middle Ages and the formation of the philologies as we know them is also a product of Romanticism. And in this way, Celtic Studies in Marburg is a very romantic institution, with the core of the curriculum in medieval cultures of Irish and Wales. But the research focus is on these cultures in dialogue with the others, as in the works of Alderic Blom on the glossing, or of Professor Eric Poppe on literary transfer in Ireland and Wales, and further research projects here. And we are also a very international institution. People working here come not only from Germany, but also from Netherlands, via England, Argentina, and Russia. Llywarchen stanzas and the works of David ap Gwilym are part of the regular Marburg curriculum. But it is a wonderful opportunity for us to welcome the ambassador of the modern Welsh culture in the world today, the National Poet of Wales, Ifor ap Glyn. His poetry refers to medieval motifs. We will hear today the cauldron of rebirth mentioned, and some of us will remember discussing Pardadene in the context of the second branch of Mabinogi. But this image appears in a poem commissioned on the occasion of opening the fifth session of the Welsh National Assembly, making it part of the present and of future. Ifor ap Glyn was born in London in a Welsh-speaking family. He graduated from Cardiff University in Welsh literature and Welsh history, and worked as a television producer and scriptwriter before becoming writer and television presenter. He received twice the crown of the Nationaldichters of Wales, 1999 and 2013, the crown being the prize for the best free verse. And he was Children's Poet Laureate for Wales, Bonpland Cymru, in 2008 and 9, and 2016 he was appointed the National Poet of Wales. In addition to a number of poetry volumes, Ifor ap Glyn published a fascinating book, Hanes yr Iaith mewn hanner cant neu 55? Hanner cant, iawn, gair. The history of the Welsh language in 50 words, which brings together fun facts of Celtic etymology and medieval life of some Welsh words of respectable age. The discussion of brand new words like podlight for podcast, or abbreviations like OMB, Omambach, the Welsh analog for OMG, just so much nicer. This is again a great example how our guest promotes the living miracle that is the Welsh language, with its Celtic roots, glorious medieval past, and the vibrant present, and Marburg, still here, with hopefully a bright future. Croeso cynnes i chi, herzlich willkommen, and Oliver, the floor is yours.
Iawn, wel, dank, vielen Dank, Athro, Elena. Es freut mich sehr, mit Ihnen heute Abend zu sein. Und ich möchte einige Gedichte und vielleicht etwas über Cymru oder Wales mit Ihnen teilen. Es wird auf Englisch, ein bisschen Schuldeutsch und Walisisch gehen. Und wir fangen mit Wales an. So, wie Sie wahrscheinlich schon wissen, Wales ist eine der 4 Nationen in der sogenannten Vereinigten Königreich. Wales ist so groß wie ein Land hier in Deutschland, zum Beispiel Anhalt Sachsen oder Hessen. Und mit einer Bevölkerung von 3 Millionen. Obwohl wir viel kleiner als England sind. Da gibt es eine Bevölkerung von 56 Millionen. Wir sind kulturell und politisch unterschiedlich. So culturally and politically distinct. So I think let's change it all up as we go. I'd like to begin with a poem that was written at the behest of our government, our Welsh government, which was established in 1999. As Elena has already referred to, a poem that was written to mark the opening of the 5th session of the Senedd, or as we know it, or the Welsh Parliament. I'll come back to that in a minute, but I'd like to begin with a poem that was written at their request to mark the first year of COVID. And I hope that I won't be called upon to write another poem to mark the second year of COVID, although that seems increasingly possible. The poem is called, now auf Deutsch, Besinnen. Ja, auf die zweite Page. So, Besinnen. Auf Walisisch ist es dod at ein Coed. Und das ist wirklich kommen nach dem Holz. Oder vielleicht kommen nach dem Feuerholz. The image is one of getting down to work. It's not to sort of come and hug a tree or something like this. It's just, you know, that's an coed one. We're getting down to it. We're mucking in. Now we have to get on with it. But the reason why I chose this image, which unfortunately doesn't translate so readily into German, was because to mark the memory of those who had been lost during the first year of COVID in Wales, it was decided to plant 2 memorial woods, so Wald Gedächtnis, Gedenkswald. Yeah. Anyway, and so that was the sort of that was the hook. That was the hook into the poem. The Ich werde jetzt das Gedicht auf Walisisch lesen, aber ich hoffe, dass Sie mit Ihren deutschen Übersetzungen mir folgen können. So, it's the Besinnen is the translation. Die Übersetzung ist die Übersetzungen sind alle von meiner Freundin Dani Schlick. Dani kommt aus Lößnitz im Osten, aber sie seit 5 Jahren bei uns in Wales wohnt. So, it's such a new poem, it's still in the book. Beth yw ein dyddiau, ond cawod ddail, a llynedd yn hydref a phwysol o hir. Heddiw, mae heilwen lem yr heb fod eto wanwyn yn gwynu sgerbyda'r bedw yn erbyn awyr boenus o las. A down yma, gan sathru cliciad y man ddriga ac yna ymlynyddu gan anadlu hefo'r coed. Bydd deilan yn disgyn, yn troelli a phlantio, a nina'n ymuno gan bwyll yn ei chylchoedd nes nofio mewn atgofion. Gallwn ailgyfannu yma, lle mae'r ffin yn dena rhwng gwreiddiau'r pridd a briga'r gwynt, rhwng corff ac enaid. A bydd y derw cyn hir yn hwylio'r tymhorau, yn teulu gogoniant drwy'r eglwysi gwyrdd, yn gogrwn hael i'r cysgodion islaw. A'n galar yn gwisgo lliwiau newydd am fod rhaid. So, diolch yn fawr iawn. Walisisch ist, wie Sie wahrscheinlich schon wissen, eine keltische Sprache. Sie gehört zum gleichen Zweig des Sprachstammbaums wie Irisch, Schottisch, Gälisch, Brettonisch, Kornisch und so weiter, Manxisch. Wir sind Schwestersprachen mit Kornisch und Brettonisch und wir sind die Cousinesprachen sind Irisch, Schottisch, Gälisch und Manx. Wir sind die sogenannten P-Celts und unsere Cousine in Irland, Schottland und so weiter sind die Q-Celts. Wenn wir sagen Pen, Kopf oder Pui, das ist wer, sagen die Cousine in Irland und Schottland nicht pen, pui, aber ke, aber kiaun. Nee, kiaun oder ke, okay? So, pen, pui, kiaun, ke, k. Es gibt auch eine Ähnlichkeit zwischen die Wörter, die mit gur auf Walisisch anfangen und die Wörter, die mit F auf Irisch beginnen. Zum Beispiel, ein Mann auf Walisisch, das ist gur, aber auf Irisch ist es far. So gur, far, ge, f. Ne, gur, f. Wenn man Wein trinkt in Wales, auf Walisisch, wenn man trinkt auf Walisisch, trinkt der Glyn, aber auf Irisch Fien. Wenn etwas wahr ist in Wales, in Walisisch, sich gwir, aber auf Irisch vier und so weiter. Gwymon, Fimmen, das ist Tang oder Alge, Gras, Stroh, das ist Gwair, Fair und so weiter. Jaun, but perhaps the most obvious thing to stress about the Welsh language is how significantly different it is from English. It is not, even though we live so close to each other, they are linguistically very different languages. We're not cousins or sisters even. Welsh is not a dialect or a variation of English. It is a completely eine ganz verschiedene Sprache. Aber es gibt viele Wörter, die geborgt von Englisch sind. Can I see one here? Clock? No, I can't see a clock. Clock, auf Englisch, clock, same word. Wall, die Wand, wall, wow. Aber es gibt auch viele Wörter von Lateinisch, zum Beispiel Breich, Brachia, Breich, Eglwys, wir haben we heard the bells earlier, Eglwys, das ist aus Ecclesia, Église en français, Pont, Pons, Pontis, auch Pont auf Französisch, Cadre, Kathedra, Stuhl auf Deutsch. Es gibt einige Beispiele von Französisch, Tour, auf Walisisch, Tour, c'est la même chose, Tour, Tour Eiffel, Turm auf Deutsch. Und Irisch, wir haben einige Wörter, die von Irisch geborgt sind. Stirn, Talken auf Irisch. Wenn man einen Boiler in der Wand macht, Tolk auf Walisisch und Irisch. Und eine Schweinestall ist ein Tulk. Leider gibt es keine Wörter von der deutschen Sprache in Walisisch. But we're working on it. And of course, the interesting thing about language is they're not just different sets of labels to put on the same things. The very, I mean, it's an obvious thing to say, but our very ways of thinking about things are configured by language and in different ways. So, einige Beispiele. Auf Walisisch, man kann ein Schall hören, wie als Deutsch. Aber auf Walisisch kann man auch Gerüche hören. Man kann auch einen Geschmack hören. Okay. Sef clywed, dwi'n gallu clywed sŵn, ein Schall hören, clywed sŵn, clywed ogla, neu clywed blas. Ich höre den Geschmack. Auf Walisisch können wir gar nichts haben, to have something. Das ist für uns überhaupt kein Begriff. Die Sachen sind einfach mit uns. Das mag ich sehr. Yeah. Auch Irisch. My geni spectol. There is with me a spectacles. Auf Irisch, I have a book. My geni lyfr. Auf Irisch, ta llawer agam. There is book with me. The word order is the same, but the pattern is similar. And just to close that little section, of course, our word Wales, Cymru, Wales. Well, Wales etymologically takes us back to ideas of the other, die Leute, die irgendwo am Rande. It's obviously not something that we would call ourselves. So what do we call ourselves? We call ourselves the Cymru, a Cymro. A Cymro is somebody who is con bro. Con, das ist zusammen, mit. Bro, das ist ein Stück Land. So we are the people from the same bit of land. We are the Cymru is the together land, which is a fine ideal. But can we live up to that ideal? Well, now then, in Britain, and to a lesser extent in Wales in 2020, we did see protests under the banner Black Lives Matter, and one of the injustices that was highlighted was the Windrush Scandal. Now, the first boat bringing Gastarbeiter from what were still British colonies in the West Indies in 1948 was called the Windrush, and many others followed until the 1970s, but these Caribbean settlers have become known collectively as the Windrush generation. That's where it comes from. Despite living as upstanding citizens for most of their lives, anybody who has lost their papers, and I'm sure we've all lost our papers at some point, anybody who's lost their papers who is of the Windrush generation are treated as illegal immigrants. They lose the right to work, they lose the right to hospital treatment. They are sometimes deported to a country that they may not have known since they were very small, perhaps as small as young Francisco, who's in the back somewhere. This is, so this is a poem in support of their plight. Hey, Francisco. The Welsh title needs a little bit of explanation. The translation is a work in progress that Danny just did at my behest just before I left, and I'm not sure if we quite cracked the title. The Welsh title is Glyn fy myd, which could be translated as Selig bin ish. And that's, of course, it's a reference to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, the Berg Predigt, with its series of statements, Selig sind, und so weiter. For instance, Selig sind die Frieden stiften, denn sie werden Gottes Kinder heißen. Now, in Welsh, that is, Selig sind is Gwyn ei byd. Das ist wirklich, Selig ist ihre Welt. Selig ist ihre Welt. However, Gwyn also not only means Selig, it also more usually means weiß. So this poem asks, is my white world blessed if it is founded on systemic injustice? Because, of course, I am not threatened with deportation because I have the right coloured skin. However, I wasn't born in Wales, and if asked for whatever whim to justify my presence in Wales, I would be unable to do that. I wouldn't have the paperwork, and so automatically I would then fall foul of the system. So Mein heile Welt is the working title of the translation, and it's on the first page. And with the cameraman's permission, I'm going to stand up and bounce around a bit with this because it's quite an angry poem. And I will shout so you can hear me in there. Gwyn fy myd, I Paulette Wilson, Anthony Bryan ac Amelia Gentleman. Paulette Wilson and Anthony Bryan were both threatened with deportation, and Amelia Gentleman wrote a very wonderful book, just blowing the whole scandal open. And she's also Boris Johnson's sister-in-law, but we don't hold that against her at all. Boris should listen to Amelia. Okay, Gwyn fy myd. And of course, it was written at a time of COVID when we thought we were being treated so badly because we couldn't do the things we usually wanted to do. We were streng, restricted. But were we really? Gwyn fy myd wrth osgoi'r aflwydd yn gaeth ac eto ddim wrth dreidio 10,000 o gama ar gyrion fy nhre. A cherddaf yr hen lwybra a llygyd newydd, nes ailafal yn iaith tymhora, a medru cyweirio rhwng sgwrs ara y mynydd pell, a tharabl sydyn y cloddia. Gwyn fy myd a dim ond drumkit a denydd coloman I darfu ar fy heddwch, dyna mraint, ond gall newid ar amrantiad. Achos nid fyma ceis I ngeni na magu, mai fyma dwi wedi byw hefo mhlant honedig. Sgin i'n prawf mod i'n Gymro, mai fyma dwi wedi gweithio bob un o 20 mlynedd dwytha. Ond sneb yn fy herio a iaith front fel na. Felly, gwyn fy myd. A diolchaf. Na chaim o'n nadur a cael yn rhin mewn sbyty bod yn stamp wedi dalu ys cyn gennu'r sawl sydd yn gwarafyn i mi'r hawl. Diolchaf, na chaim o'n ni swyddon a'n rhoi allan o'n hun, na chaim o'n alltudio i ddinas sydd ddim yn ynghofio, na chaim o'n ngharcharu ar gyrio maes awyr gan rhai sydd yn gwneud celwydd o myd. Ond, gwyn ein byd pan na allwn gerddad o'r tu arall heibio, pan fo'r rhod yn troi yng nghalon pob tre, a rhodiwn hen lwybra a llygyd newydd. Cydroedio drwy'r trwch, drwy fwd y geia, nes cerddad hafa newydd ein hiaith, nes ailgodi yn amgenach, nes byw mewn lliw, nid gweld mewn du a gwyn. Diolch. And of course, my turning round and indicating them was by no means intended to suggest that I think these notables behind me are anyway culpable for seeing the world in black and white. Sorry. Grabbing props when you find them. Yeah, so, where shall we go next? I'm going to go straight to another poem, a short poem. A poem celebrating linguistic diversity. A poem entitled Der Amselgesang. Auf Felisisch auf Felisisch Ceiliog Mialchen. That's the cockbird, the cockbird of the blackbird. Mialchen is the blackbird. We also call it a derindi, and I do in the poem as well. But the Ceiliog Mialchen differentiates between this is the one who sings basically. He's the guy you want to have in your garden, and there was one who would delight me as I would be gardening, sitting on the chimney. And this poem, Elena mentioned the two Crown collections. The second one, this is the last poem from that collection. A celebration, I suppose, of why. In Bonn yesterday, somebody asked me, why should small languages survive? He did qualify it by saying, I think they should, but yeah, so this poem, I guess, tries to answer that question. Ceiliog Mialchen. Yng nghefn y tŷ, wrth bwyso ar fy rhaw, mae deryn du yn addo paradwys, yn garglo heilwen yr hwyr yn ei wdd. Mi ganith, am fod rhaid iddo, byrlymu'r noda croew, ei delori sy'n fy ngalw at fy ngwaith i greu chwildro gyda gwen, am fod y byd yn gan i gyd, a bwlch enbyd yn ei harmoni, heb noda ein halaw nina. Thank you. Yeah, well, if I may repeat some of the things that I will try and explain very quickly something of the characteristic forms of Welsh poetry. My chosen means of expression is what we in Welsh call kopfreie Dichtung. There are es gibt drei Art Poesie auf Felisisch. Canicaeth, das ist strenge Dichtung, Canirydd, freie Dichtung, und Canipenrydd, kopffreie Dichtung. Eine Dichtung, das freier ist als frei. Aber bei uns frei, Canirydd, freie Dichtung, das bedeutet Dichtung metrisch, mit Reim. Die vers libre, c'est le kopffrei. The So what do you have to do? What is Kanigkeit? What is this unusual one? Because I'm sure we all know what Vers libre is. We all know what metrische Dichtung is. Kanigkeit is an ancient tradition that dates back to, has its roots in the 7th century, in the earliest Welsh poetry. It has been codified in its present form, at least since the 14th century. And to write Cynghanedd, which is the characteristic of Kanigkeit, strenge Dichtung. Cynghanedd means literally harmony. It's a set of rules which, when applied, make each line more euphonious. And it has been described as the Princeton Encyclopedia as the most sophisticated system of sound patterning. Maybe I should say this in an American accent. It is the most sophisticated system of sound patterning practiced in any poetry in the world. Yes, sir. Yeah, and if the Princeton Encyclopedia says, who are we to doubt them? It's very old, aber sie ist eine ununterbrochene Tradition. Geregelt, schon, aber doch flexibel genug, um die modernsten Geschichten und Themen zu erzählen. So, that's what it can do, but how do you do it? Well, I'm now going to try and explain Cynghanedd in 3 easy steps. Because really, in essence, it is pretty simple. Doing it is not so simple, but to understand what's going on is relatively simple. So, the first kind of Cynghanedd involves internal rhyme. The penultimate syllable of the line must rhyme with a preceding syllable, preferably one close to it. So as a Schlechtdeutsch, Beispiel auf Schlechtdeutsch, hier kann man der Speck einstecken. Now, why would you want to stick the Specken in the, whatever, but you can hear the internal rhyme. The Eck in Speck rhymes with the Eck in einstecken. So the Eck in einstecken is the penultimate syllable. So that would be a perfectly valid line of Cynghanedd. That is the first kind. It wouldn't be a very good line. It's not even grammatisch, but there we go. The second kind of Cynghanedd involves alliteration. So as an example, explain it. Alliteration. The consonants in the first part of the line must be repeated in the same order in the second part of the line, either partially or wholly. So there are actually 2 kinds of Cynghanedd, but in essence, the same principle obtains in both kinds. So as a German example, einige Schlüssel sind eingeschlossen. Einige Schlüssel sind eingeschlossen. So einige Schlüssel, ng, schl, s, and then sind eingeschlossen, ng, g, s at the end. Okay, so that's the second kind of Cynghanedd. The third kind of Cynghanedd, the third and last kind of Cynghanedd, you'll be glad to hear, is a combi Cynghanedd that involves both internal rhyme and alliteration. So as a German example, again, not particularly grammatisch, ist krank und im Schrank schreibt. Okay, or perhaps a better one, eine lange Schlange ist schlecht. So what's happening there? The first part rhymes with the second part. So ist krank und im Schrank. So ank. But then the second rhyme alliterates with a word at the end. So ist krank und im Schrank schreibt. So from Schrank is then repeated in the last bit. Or in the other example, eine lange Schlange ist schlecht. So you have a double rhyme there. Ange, Schlange, and then Schlange and schlecht. In Welsh, eine kurze Schlange ist schlecht would also be correct because we're not fussed about double rhymes in Welsh. So the in kurze would be sufficient to rhyme with the in Schlange. And then, of course, the schle alliterates with schlecht. So, I don't have an example. I will give not the one I read earlier because that's far too rude. This just as a little example. This is a breakup poem written in Cynghanedd. Here we go. It's called. I will read a little bit of the translation in English. So, gwahanu. Un tro tra ni gwatwar hi, gwyliais ei gwep yn gwelwi, ein byd ni ar nabod noeth a rannwyd gan air anoeth. Clywais ei llais yn lleihau yn ddigri cyn troi'n ddagrau, sŵn od yn atalnodi y nos a ddaeth rhyngo ni. So you can see, or you can hear there the different kinds of Cynghanedd. Sŵn od yn atalnodi, that's the first kind that we mentioned, the internal rhyme. Sŵn od yn atalnodi. There are lots of examples of the second kind. Un tro tra ni gwatwar hi, NTR, NTR. Gwatwar, un tro tra ni gwatwar hi. And then the third kind, clywais ei llais yn lleihau, ais, ll. Clywais ei llais yn lleihau. But what does it mean? The split. Once when I was ragging her, I saw her face grow paler. Our world of naked knowledge cleft by one word like a wedge. I heard her voice growing small and weird before the tearfall, an odd sound that punctuated the dividing dark ahead. It's not a particularly successful translation because it is almost impossible to replicate those patterns in English or in German. I've replicated the syllabic pattern, I've replicated the rhyming pattern, but I think there are one or two examples of lines that have, but anyway. So that is an example of Cynghanedd, because in my contract as national poet I have to tell everybody about Cynghanedd. Right. So perhaps I'll say a little bit about the Welsh language, and we'll see where we go from there. Linguistic ecology. Welsh and German are both part of an increasingly fragile worldwide linguistic ecology, and it's in recognition of that fragility that the United Nations have announced that the decade commencing next year will be a decade of action for indigenous languages. There are, as you no doubt know, some 7,000 languages in the world, and there is a real risk that many of them will be lost in the next few years. Now, these statistics can become very numbing, but I'm going to try and present some of them at least in a way that will resonate. So, German is the 12th largest language in the world in terms of numbers of speakers. So, congratulations, good. The top 200 languages in the world all have more than 2 million speakers. Between them, they are spoken by 88% of the world's population. So 2 million, they're all quite big, chunky, hefty languages. However, only 1,100 of the world's languages have more than 100,000 speakers. So if we imagine these 7,000 languages as a continuum with the smallest here and the biggest here, we come all the way to here before we reach the languages that the 1,100 languages, which is just over 1 in 7, that have 100,000 speakers. That's the size of a sort of modest town in Germany. That's not a lot. Welsh has 600,000 speakers, so woof, lucky us. We're not in the top. We're in the top 1,100. We're actually somewhere around number 430. Thank you very much, which is wonderful. However, as speakers of Welsh, we are concerned about the future of our language, and these statistics that I'm bombarding you with only underline the scale of the threat to the linguistic diversity of our species. Because if I, as a Welsh speaker, am worried about the future of the Welsh language, number 430, it doesn't bode well for all the other languages that are further down that continuum. Of course, numbers are not the only significant factor. You perhaps aware that Icelandic is spoken by, I think, around 250,000 speakers. That's a much smaller number than Welsh, but the Icelandic language, because it is a sovereign language, it is the language of all the people of Iceland. It doesn't have to contend with the phenomenon of, yes, I'm Icelandic, but I don't speak the language, but I'm just as Icelandic as you. These are the kind of things that we have grown up with in Wales. So, we have to juggle. Of course, we cannot deny the Welsh identity of our fellow citizens. That would be, a nasty thing to do. But if we want the language to be part of their identity, if we want the language to grow, then it has to be presented in a constructive way. I always say that the Welsh language belongs to all the citizens of Wales, whether they speak it or not. Now, okay, there may be an element of sophistry in that, but if you don't feel something belongs to you, you're not likely to want to learn it. So if you at least feel it belongs to you and it's something to be proud of, then maybe you want your children to learn it. Maybe you won't learn it, but maybe you want your children to learn it. So there is scope then, hopefully, for growth. Let's have a poem. Yes, let's have the Pair Dadeni poem. Dieses Haus. The poem that was written to mark the opening. It was actually my first job as Nationaldichter. A Tihon. And ja, wenn wir Wales wollen, dann müssen wir Wales erschaffen. Glyn Williams, a wonderful historian of Wales, and another wonderful phrase that he made was, Wales is an artifact which we make and remake in each generation if we want to. That's very, very perspicacious. Of course, it's true of all nations. Germany is an artifact that we make and remake in every generation. But I don't think there's much question around if we want to. That is kind of, yeah, why would we not want to? But that is the point. In Wales, I'll come back to the elephant in the room in a minute. A tu hwn. Daeth Gwanwyn yn hwyr i'n gwlad, y gaea wedi cloi ein hechelgais a gwydro ein diheuada cyn y datmar mawr, a barodd i'r gwteri garglo ar landeri garlanu. Boed felly hael ar y tu hwn heddiw. Dyma bair ein dadeni a llwyfan i'n llais, lle canwn ein gweledigaeth i fodolaeth. A dawn yma, o sawl cwmwd megis cynt, wrth droedio'r llwybr dreiniog cul sydd â gwlan fel trimmings dolig ar ei hyd, neu wrth heidio lawr y lôn wleb sy'n ddrych i sglein yr awyr. Dawn yma i gyffwrdd ar gorwel a'i blygu at iws gwlad. Ac wrth ddynesu, o'n cymoedd a mynyddoedd at ein dinas barhaus, diolchwn nad oes tylla bwledi ymhileru'r tu hwn. Dim ond cwmwl tystion, wrth ein cefn, ym mhob pluraliaeth barn. Ac wrth gael ein tywys i gynteddau'r tŷ, boed angerdd i'n trafod a phwyll ym mhob cymod. Boed i anodd ddod yn syml, a'r heriol ddod yn hwyl. A boed i ni gofio'r wireb hon beunydd, cynt y cyferfydd doi ddyn, na doi fynydd. So. The last two lines, which have been translated as Gemeinsame Wille kann Großes beginnen, It is literally in English, sooner will two men meet than two mountains. Mountains are stuck. If they are far apart, they will remain far apart if we don't allow for sort of the movement of tectonic plates and stuff like that. But within our own kind of time scale, they will remain far apart. But we can come together. We can make sure that we don't remain far apart, and that is an important message, and one which I try and share as often as possible. Do I need to be wrapping this up now? Oh! We can do a lot of damage in a quarter of an hour. So, just to enlarge a bit, I don't know why I keep putting these glasses on, I can read. They make me look so intellectual though, don't you think? The Welsh language faces considerable challenges, not least of which large numbers of our young people seek educational and economic opportunities outside of Wales. Many will not return. Over the years, of course, these young emigrants have sustained Welsh culture in an extensive diaspora across the USA, Patagonia, Francisco, and of course the larger cities of England, such as Liverpool, Manchester, and of course London. I am a product of that diaspora. When I was growing up in London, there were 40 Welsh language chapels, 40 chapels, places of worship, where the medium of worship was in Welsh. They were also, perhaps more importantly in terms of language survival, also important social centres. There was a small school where you could be taught through the medium of Welsh, a rugby club, a social club, and so weiter. But if emigration is challenging for the Welsh language, immigration is all the more so, because 27% of the population of Wales in 2011 were born outside of Wales. 3/4 of those who were born outside of Wales were born not far away in England. Now, this can have a disproportionate impact on more thinly populated rural areas where the Welsh language has predominated. Some incomers, it's very gratifying to say, do embrace the host language. In our midst, we find Welsh speakers with splendidly German surnames, such as Eisentraut. I was trying to remember these names for you earlier. Eisentraut, Löffler, Stuhlfelder, Baum, Otting, Köhler, and of course Daniela Schlick, who's translated the poems that you've heard. Germany was until recently Wales's biggest export market, and despite the collective act of self-harm, which we know as Brexit, you can probably guess how I voted in that referendum. Welsh exports to Germany are still very important to our economy. Tourists from Germany, after the Irish and the Americans, are the next biggest group of overseas visitors to Wales. But the cultural connections between our two countries, of course, go much deeper than this, and I don't need to explain this in Marburg, maybe, because, of course, German universities such as Marburg have maintained an interest in the Welsh language since the 19th century. I think in Humboldt in Berlin, first of all. Yeah, certainly it was there that the Zeitschrift für Keltische Philologien was established way back in 1896.
Now in Marburg.
Now in Marburg, cool, hey. And if you want to learn Welsh, you can do so in Leipzig, in Königswinter, Bonn, Marburg, and so on. It would be interesting to just note here, if you wanted to learn Welsh in an English university, you could certainly do so in Oxford, and you could certainly do so in Cambridge. I may be doing them a disservice, but I don't think you can do so anywhere else in England. Now then, Germany is doing much better than England. Now, that might not be a surprise. However, one might argue, well, yes, but if you want to learn Welsh in England, well, you should go to Welsh University, go to Bangor, go to Aberystwyth, go to Caerdydd, etc., etc., etc. Yes, that is true. That is an argument that cannot be gainsaid. However, if you look at that from a different angle, if that was the case, why is it that all English and Welsh universities have modern languages departments where one can learn German, one can learn French, Spanish, Italian, and so on and so on? One could equally say to them, well, yes, don't learn German in Birmingham, go to Germany. And of course, people do. For 1 year of the course, they go. But, so it doesn't, you can't argue this both ways. Either, yes, we don't need to learn these languages because people will go to the countries, or yes, we do need to learn these languages. And Welsh is a language that perhaps should be given not greater status, but should be, how can I put this? My predecessor, Gillian Clark, described the Welsh language as one of the treasures, not of Wales, but of Britain. And she memorably said, the Welsh language is like the cathedrals of Britain. We might not want to visit them that often. However, we would be distraught if we learnt that they had been pulled down. Very true, very true. Yeah, so as you might have guessed, I consider myself a Welsh European, more so than a Welsh Briton, even though recent developments at Westminster are trying to push us in a different direction. The need to maintain economic and political and, above all, cultural contact is as important as ever, perhaps more important than ever. So I'd like to read, perhaps to close before we go to maybe 2 points. We shall see. This is let's read Berlin's Geistermauer. I had the pleasure of making a Welsh language documentary about the 20th anniversary of the fall of the wall, relying on the contributions of a number of Welsh-speaking Germans, most of whom were former students at Humboldt. And of course, they don't teach Welsh at Humboldt anymore, I don't think, no. But until, well, certainly in 1889, certainly in 1989, Welsh was still being taught in Humboldt. And of course, because where Humboldt is located, most of the students were students from the East. So it was interesting. It was interesting to become aware of. I've always been interested in dialects because my mother is from North Wales. My father speaks the Welsh of Mid Wales. So we were hearing different words, and they would pull each other's leg and and so on. So to realise that two different political systems had helped to generate dialectical differences was interesting, and I must say I like some of the East German words. I think Feierabendheim. That's much nicer than Altheim. I mean, Altheim is just alt. Du bist alt. Get in the Heim. But there's something more colourful there. I liked also the Mutiheft, the idea that somebody would even worry about that kind of thing. To have this book to take home to your parents, so they could not just say how badly you've done in subjects at the end of the year. This poem was my one attempt. I have to show this to you in the book. Where is it? My one sad attempt at writing concrete poetry. There's a picture of concrete there. but yeah. So unfortunately, we couldn't replicate it in the translation. So these apparently random splits in the line, of course, symbolise the split that is the wall. Right. So Berlin's Geistermauer, and obviously, needless to say, the language. Oh yeah, another point I should make. The language of the poem is, as you will hear, is a sort of macaronic combination of Welsh and German. The poem is about. The poem argues with those who would say that we need to build walls. Building walls is, any society thinks building walls is the answer. I think is probably a sick society. The language of the poem, being a macaronic combination of Welsh and German, as you will hear, is in itself a refutation of that mindset. There's two languages that are embracing each other in the poem, and so hopefully it's a celebration of cultural exchange at several levels. Berlin's Geistermauer. Sawn I weddillion y wal. Mewn cerdd, daw geiriau ben a'i ffin eitha, y deall a'r camddeall, ac yma cawsant I tolldi'n rhaniad concret, yn frawddeg o wal I gipio'ch gwynt wrth ail ganu tair byw a beddi'r meirw yn llain wag. Ac eto'n gwadd dehongliadau gwahanol, Schutzwal o dy Siandamauer, corlannu'r cyfiawn yn tacwilydd mewn concret. Mae wastad dwy ochr I wal. Ac yma bydd dwy wlad gynt, ac un iaith yn ei rhannu, vom Muttiheft zum Feierabendheim, o fora oes nes roi tools ar y bar. Ac wedi'r cyfannu bydd rhai geiriau yn gwrthod colli blas. Trinkfix, eierkuchen, knusperflocken, rondo café. Y geiriau styfnig sy'n gwrthod derbyn I timp ydy'r rhain, bod I dal yn viertel 11, nid viertel nach 10. Rhaid dysgu felly rhannu ein hanesion. Hören wir einander zu und nehmen wir uns gegenseitig ernst. Achos pan fo un gerdd yn peidio, mae'r llinella yn parhau. A'i geiriau'n dal I fynd ben a'i ffin eitha, y deall a'r camddeall. Ac yn ein gwledydd, cwyd waliau newydd, a ni ein hunain ei cododd nhw, und nur wir selbst können sie einreißen. Ni yn unig all ei dymchwel nhw. Ystwedodd bardd o Gymro, mawr ei glod, nid ydym yn credu mewn waliau, ond maen nhw'n bod. Yeah. The grosse dichter who was referred to there was T.H. Parry Williams, who spent a year or maybe 2 years in Freiburg around 1912, 1913. He was. I'm paraphrasing him there because he was writing about fairies, and he said we don't believe in fairies, but they exist. So. Noch ein or noch ein. Okay, well, to continue. I mean, I think it's apposite, weil wir hier in Marburg sind. Ein anderer Gedicht that tries to build a bridge between our two languages, our two cultures. In March last year, the last time I left Wales was to go to Germany, to Berlin. The Institute of Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam had, together with our unsere Wales Regierung, they had put on a conference entitled "The Future is Now." So it was an opportunity to share expertise in sustainability, in all kinds of things pertaining to. It wasn't just about science; it was also about changing attitudes and nudge theory and all kinds of things. How can we get people? I mean, we had a classic example of this in the COP26 conference. Boris Johnson stood up and said important things about how we need to change the world, and then he flew home from Glasgow on a plane. It's not just about saying stuff; it's about changing attitudes. But it's also about what can we learn from each other. And it was here that I once again picked the brains of Danny Schlick. We sat down one evening over a pint of beer, and I had this idea that to sort of get into people's mindset, we have to. It's only through proverbs that we can do that. These are the things where the sort of the old wisdom is locked in, and perhaps if we can release that, we can find a. It's a rather fanciful way. Obviously, I'm not suggesting this is how we solve the climate crisis, but maybe there's something there. And so she shared a number of proverbs, German proverbs, which are again featured in this sort of macaronic style, and the last at the end of the sheet, Dant is explained. That's a sort of key thing. Whilst we can be very different, two different things when they come together can be euphonious. They can be creative, and this is the essence of our the musical tradition that we know in Welsh as Dant, the creft of the string, the harp string, that is. Where a melody, well, it's explained there. Eine Besonderheit der walisischen Musik. You can all read for yourself better than I can. However, the one last note before we have the poem. The last line is translated as "Nun, wie es in den Wald hin." Nein. The original is "Candy Benich Wuin Eth." Nein, which is a play on words, which is impossible to replicate in German or any other language, I think. We have this phrase in Welsh, "Candy benith fwynith nein." It's our way of saying what in English would be expressed as "scratch my back and I'll scratch yours." You do something for me, I'll do something for you. So "Candy benith fwynith nein," sing a pretty verse for your grandmother, and your grandmother will sing one back to you. So that's our rather colourful way of saying what is rather more prosaically expressed in English is "you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours." But the Welsh word for Großmutter in North Wales is nein. So I was able to ask the question, "Can die benich wohin ith?" Nein. So in the context of aber wird alles für die Katze sein? Can die benich wohin ith? Nein. You sing, you scratch. Will it all be in vain? No. You scratch my back, and no. Anyway. Right. So. Cyd ddiarhebu auf Deutsch. Wasch mir den Pelz, aber mach mich nicht nass. Golcha fa ffwr, ond paid ti ynglychu. Ond dyna'r hen drefndreiliedig, yr hen gredo gwirdroedig, mynaf y feindydd heb orfod a berthu. Bellach, mae padera newydd sydd angen ei cydleisio, a dwy wlad anghymarus yn dechrau ymddiwygio, yn dechrau cydfyrddwydio. Gemeinsam können wir Berge versetzen, nicht nur schön Wetter machen. Drwy fyw yn ôl ein hangen, nid yn ôl ein gwanc, byw o fewn y cyfribanc. Ni allwn ragor ein saws o'n brawsleben. Disgwrs amgen sydd ei angen, a'r cyd i arhebu yw dechrau cyfathrebu. Aso, wusst be? Sorry. Aso, wusst be? Wasch mir den Pelz und du kannst mich nass machen. Wedi'r cyfan, ond nid ydym yn hongian am sain yn ffaden. Heb ddisgyn, mond a drwch blewyn. Felly naw wfft i ragor fydd o haes y lwft. Daw cyd-deall o gyd ddiarhebu, a dechrau gweithredu, ac yn harddwch yr rhannu, bydd ein dwy wlad megis yn canu cerdd dant, alaw a chyfalaw, lles ein plant. Aber wird alles für die Katze sein? Well, kann die bennill fwy nyth? Nein. So.
Diolch o galon. Before we go out into the night, I would like to say a few words of gratitude in several languages. Zuerst herzlichen Dank an das Haus Marburger Haus der Romantik, das uns heute diesen schönen Abend ermöglicht hatte. An Frau Professor Matías und vor allem an Frau Mocher hier. Ja, vielen lieben Dank. Secondly, to Professor Alderic Blom for his support in organizing this event. Thirdly, to all of you who came. We all know that things are not still as they used to be. So coming to an event in the real world takes an effort, much appreciated. And last but not least, diolch o galon eto am y noson arbennig llawn o farddoniaeth ac awen. I have it there, but it's out there. I will be. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Sorry. Wait, no, that's fine. This is some barddoniaeth on my negerie. This is this Knabenwunderhorn, which has an addition to which some of the people there participated. And the work is Goethe recommended für jede Küche des einfaches Volkes und für jedes Klavier der Gelehrten.
Oh.
So, diolch o galon eto.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Diolch yn fawr iawn.